Good morning, guys. Let's cut this and get back to this. This actually. How's everyone doing this morning? It's like I just talked to some of you yesterday. The goal of today is just to have a kind of a lecture about the new chapter we're covering this week. I hope everyone has had a chance to see the new module I launched this morning. It's here in eLearn, right here. At the bottom, you'll see March 23rd through 29th. You got the Hot Pocket ready? All right, Salima. Hey, at this point in time when we're at home, we have to eat what we can eat. At least you're eating at home. That's awesome. But I launched a new module March 23rd through 29th. This is a heavy module. This is going to be no, it's not probably. From this point forward, this is your toughest week. I'll just be honest with you. You have an exam due this week, you have your article review paper due this week, and you have the regular stuff that you're normally going to do every week. So of the weeks, this is your toughest, and I say that to only say get started and get busy doing that. But for the sake of time, I don't want to stretch this stream out. We're going to have just a little lecture about lifespan development. So I'm going to do this real quick. Hold on one second. I need to take one setting off here. All right, and done. All right, that's done. Close that out. Bring this back up. There we go. All right, so we're back here. I'm going to launch the PowerPoint I have linked here. It says it's the very first thing in the module, Review Lifespan PowerPoint. I've already got that PowerPoint pulled up. It's right here. So let's talk. Lifespan development. Lifespan development is probably one of the most important chapters in your textbook. It's what I call the chapter that licenses one to become a parent. Backspace here. Ooh, what's happening in my PowerPoint? Yeah, do this. That didn't go over so well. It's the chapter that most people should study if they ever want to procreate or have another human being that they're responsible for. Because the words you got to remember from this chapter: change, 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 change. What I mean by change? Change in these three things. Watch. This is not the PowerPoint, but just take a look. See this Venn diagram right here in the center of your screen? Let me try to zoom in a bit on this. Zoom in. Physical, cognitive, social, emotional. Your textbook uses the word psychosocial, but that means pretty much the same thing. From the moment you were born, from the moment you are conceived as a blob of cells after the processes of meiosis and mitosis, you begin changing almost immediately physically, right? You turn from a blob of cells into a zygote, into an embryo, into a fetus, into an infant. From an infant, you turn into a toddler, then into a young child, and then you turn into a tween, somewhere between 8 and 12. Then you turn into an adolescent. Then you turn into an early adult. Then you turn into someone like me, old and crusty in their middle adulthood. And then lastly, you enter late adulthood. And through each of these changes or shifts in the lifespan, you are changing both physically, cognitively, and psychosocially, which includes the way you socially interact and your emotional reaction. So think back to this, guys. Whenever you, like most of you are juniors or seniors in high school now, and some of you may be in relationships right now, right, with other people. And I would ask you, if you were to tell me, is the relationship today that you're in with someone, let's say like an intimate relationship, like committed intimate relationship, is it the same kind of relationship as the one you had when you were in 7th grade? And a lot of you would laugh at that, wouldn't you? You would say, Terry, that's kind of comical. That's ridiculous. Like, What I had back in 7th grade is nothing compared to the kind of relationship I have with my boyfriend, girlfriend today. And I would agree, because you've changed in your psychosocial, in this domain right here. You've changed in the way you regulate emotions, navigate relationships, build relationships, maintain relationships. Like, all that's changed, even in a very short amount of time. So this chapter is all about change in these 3 domains. The reason this is a Venn diagram is because the way you change in one has impacts on the others. So let's say you come out of a bad relationship tomorrow, okay? I'm not wishing this on any of you, but you have this acute shift in your social emotional, function. Tomorrow, your boyfriend, girlfriend breaks up with you. And then you also go to take my test tomorrow, which is going to tax you cognitively. You can't tell me that those 2 domains don't interact. If you're overly emotional, withdrawn, upset, depressed, that will impact your cognitive function. How about this? If you're horribly withdrawn emotionally, socially from a relationship ending, you sometimes feel physically sick. These domains are interactive, and psychosocial development is about the study of all of the 3 of these domains and how they interact from the time you're first conceived as a blob of cells until the time you die. So it's important. There are some aspects of human development that we have to establish. First, we have to define the field. Scientific study of change, there's that word again, change, that occur to people as they age from conception to death. What are the tenets? What are the key principles of this? And guys, as I'm talking, certainly throw any comments or questions you have in chat. I'd be happy to answer them as we go along. But some tenets and principles. The first is, it's lifelong. Believe it or not, 40, 50 years ago in our discipline, this was not really a field. Lifespan development was not a field. Let me tell you what was a field. Child development. We thought for a long time as psychologists that really all this change we've been talking about, physical, cognitive, psychosocial, it starts from conception. And for a long time we thought, by the time you're 18, all done. All wrapped up. You're an adult. You're good. We no longer believe that today as a field. And so what we do is we study lifespan development throughout death, because people are still changing even into middle adulthood, like me in my late 40s, and even into late adulthood, someone in their 60s, 70s, or 80s, or beyond. So it's lifelong. That's the first principle. Principle 2, history and context has a way of influencing development. My oh my. We're in that moment now, are we not? There's a reason why your phones were ringing over the last week and a half to 2 weeks from the Sevier County school systems, not to tell you that classes have been suspended. You already knew that, didn't you? What were they saying to you guys? Lunches will be delivered by school buses. Why is that? Because we know that because of this, what we're going through at this moment, the COVID-19 epidemic, that a lot of kids are at home with no access to nutrition. Well, what's that going to impact? It's going to impact this domain right here, physical. Well, if there are interactions between the domains, what do you think is going to happen to their social well-being, emotional well-being? How about this? They're already taxed here as well, right? Cognitively, because their teacher's not there. Like, my wife sent out yesterday, or this morning, yesterday she printed out nearly 100 cards and mailed them to her students. Just not instructional cards, just like, how are you doing? I'm thinking about you. Call me. Here's my email address. If you need anything, let me know. To try to help with their social, emotional well-being. Because all that's being impacted right now. History and context impacts development. Think of World War II. Think of what happened in the cognitive, physical, and psychosocial development of children in Europe during the 1940s. It was clearly impacted. Development is multidirectional and multidimensional. That means it can go in multiple directions and through multiple dimensions. Here's what I mean. Let's take physical development, right? That's one dimension. Physical is one dimension, cognitive is dimension, psychosocial dimension. Let's take multidirectional. I am in my late 40s, right? My ability to synthesize oxygen from a physical standpoint is not the same as it was when I was your age. My body has aged, and with that, I have decreased in my ability of going backwards in my ability to synthesize oxygen. I've lost. I've gained, I think, in the cognitive domain just from experience and education. So I've gone up there, but I've also lost. So it's multidirectional, multidimensional. Lastly, it's pliable or plastic. When people hear the word plastic, I think they think hard or stiff, and that's not what it means. It means that it's changing. It's elastic. You right now, by sitting here with me in this live stream, maybe you're not in the live stream. Maybe you're watching this after the fact. Maybe you're reading your book. You are improving the pliability of your cognitive development because you're literally moving neural networks by learning new information. You're fostering, creating new connections at the synaptic level of knowledge and information. And so that's pliable, right? But, there are periods of pliability. Early in development, 0 to 3 years of age, we call that a critical period of sensitivity for pliability of cognitive development. Why? Take something like foreign language. If you want a child to develop phonetics of multiple languages, the best time to do that is 0 to 3 years of age. Expose them to the phonemes of Spanish, expose them to the phonemes of Mandarin Chinese, expose them to the phonemes of multiple languages. Even if they don't learn those languages at 3 or 4, if they just learn the phonetics, they are much more likely to grow up to not have noticeable accents when they learn those languages later, and it just sets them up with a good predisposition. So pliability is another tenet of human development. All right, one major argument that you're going to be tested on is, the argument of, is it nature or nurture? Is it nature, your genetics, your DNA, or is it nurture, the environment, food, the kind of interactions you have with that environment, and then the push and pull between those two things, right? Like, for example, take the best athletes in the world. They are genetic freaks, right? They just are. LeBron James, genetic freak. I mean freak in the best way. He was born with a genetic disposition to just be bigger, stronger, faster, more agile. Now, he's got a certain disposition, genetic disposition, but also nurture comes into play. And how much does he exercise? How much does he eat? What's his nutrition like? And I think actually, as I've watched his career, he's now 35. I'm amazed because he takes such good care of his body, and he takes the nurture aspect to his physical development very seriously. I think he spends like in excess of $1 million on his body a year, just with the way he eats, his nutrition, things like that. And so he's elongating his genetic potential through nurturing his body that way. So there's a push and pull, constant push and pull of how do we explain the psychology of outcomes and the way people think and the way people act and the way people physically mature? Well, we explain that through both their genetics and their nurture, their environment. But there's some things we got to take into account, like individual differences. LeBron James, bam. Not all humans are going to be born with that genetic sequence. He's a very unique person, like one in hundreds of millions of people. Heredity, what genetics are you given? Environment, what kind of environment do you have? What about maturation? If we want to understand the difference in the way that a 3-year-old thinks versus an 8-year-old thinks, which we're about to look at on film, versus a 20-year-old thinks? Well, there's maturation. What I mean by that is biologically, your body is changing. Your brain literally is growing and changing from the age of 3 to 8 and 8 to 20 and giving you cognitive abilities you wouldn't otherwise have. So maturation is an important part. Family structure. Family. Not only stability, but support. Maybe that's causing differences in the way people develop. And lastly, a big one, SES. Socioeconomic factors, right? We tend to see favorable outcomes of those with a higher socioeconomic outcome status, versus those with lower. I think we're seeing that now with COVID-19, right? I worry about people from a physical development standpoint who don't have health insurance. I worry they're not going to go get tested for the disease. I worry they're going to avoid the emergency room. I worry they're going to do these things and in doing so spread the disease. Those with insurance, most likely, and the ability to pay for copays, will go seek testing, will go seek treatment, and hopefully self-quarantine. Let's go to self-quarantining right now. I mean, it's real easy to quarantine if you have sufficient food in your house, right? And what does it take to get the food? Money. So socioeconomic status playing out even as we talk right now with our current epidemic. Let me kind of try to blow this one up the best I can here so you can see this a little bit better. And I don't want to overemphasize this. I would want you guys to know that there are a couple of unique research designs that we use to study human development. Cross-sectional. So you take different people of various ages and you compare them at one point in time to determine age-related differences. Let's do this. Let's have fun with this. What if I said, let's use social media as a research question. What are the differences in use of social media, specifically Facebook, amongst 20-year-olds, 40-year-olds, and 60-year-olds? What do you guys think? Would you hypothesize, type in chat, would you hypothesize that there's a big difference between those three groups? I'm curious. What if I tested them today, March 23rd, 2020, I go out and I survey 20-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 60-year-olds. I ask them, how much time are you spending on Facebook? How many friends do you have? How often do you post? What do you tend to post? Do you think I would see differences between 20, 40, and 60-year-olds in that? What do you guys think? Older people use more minion memes. Okay, yeah, possibly the case. That's an interesting hypothesis, Selena. Um, and with the cross-sectional design, cross-sectional being right, we could test that, right? We could look at meme usage clearly. I don't know. I would predict that 6-year-olds would be the least of those three groups. Least likely of those three groups to use memes, where I would predict the 20-year-olds be using memes a lot more than the other two groups. The only way we could do that research at any given moment and look at three different groups would be a cross-sectional design. Okay? Now let's say we have a different question. Let's say we're going to pose the question, over the last 10 years, which of those three groups have been using Facebook the most? Yeah, I would agree, Austin. I would hypothesize that older folks use Facebook more so than younger folks. I would agree with that. But kind of back to this longitudinal design, what if we wanted to follow a single group, the same group? So let's go back to, let's take you, for example. You are all 17, 18 years old. What if I followed you from 2010, when you were all 7 years old, 7 to 8 years old, and I followed you from 7 to 8 to now 17 to 18 over a 10-year period, and I looked at your social media use? Do you think I would see, changes occur across that time frame? What do you think I would see in all of you from 7 to 17, from 8 to 18 over a 10-year period? Tell me what you think we might see in your behavior with social media. I would predict we would see some significant changes. In fact, I'm not sure Instagram was a thing 10 years ago. I could be wrong. Facebook was. Twitter, I think, was. But I don't think Instagram was really a thing. At least I don't remember it being such a big thing 10 years ago. I'll wait for you guys to respond. Yeah, you think so, Austin? Yeah, I would agree with that. Maybe you'd see, from 7 to 14, maybe not much, but about the time you got to junior high, right, you see this rapid increase in use. See, only a longitudinal design can show us that, because you're following the same group of people over a long period of time. As opposed to the cross-sectional, you're looking at multiple groups all at the same moment. The cross-sequential design is like mashing those two things up, okay? It's taking different participants of various ages and comparing them at several points in time. It's like a mismatch of both longitudinal and cross-sectional. And there's an example there. Know those three designs? I'll ask you most likely about cross-sectional and longitudinal designs on your next exam. All right. Let me kind of back out here in my Zoom a little bit, guys. So when it comes to the genetics or to development, I would strongly, I know a lot of you have been beaten over the head with this for years, but still, the first aspect of physical development we need to talk about is genetics. That is the inherited traits of development, and namely we're talking about DNA. And DNA runs the show, right? And that you have certain genes, some dominant, some recessive, that control expressions of various traits. Those traits can be physical or behavioral, or cognitive for that matter. But just know that genetics, DNA is one aspect of development, and we certainly look at dominant recessive traits. When it comes to your physical development, I want you to know these key terms, and that is, what is conception? That's the moment at which you become pregnant. What's the ovum? That's the female sex cell or egg. What's fertilization? That's the union of a sperm and an ovum. And what's the zygote? Zygote, embryo, fetus, right? Zygote's the cell that results from the uniting of ovum and sperm. No meiosis and mitosis, creation of a unique being, replication of those cells. One thing I would throw out to you guys to think about. Males churn out literally millions of sperm cells per day that are unique, not to that person, that have never existed. Females, on the other hand, while they're still in their mother's womb, develop every ovum they will ever have. And when they're born and they eventually reach menarche, they have their first menstrual cycle, they'll begin to lose those eggs, those ovum, over time. And where men are producing new sperm cells every day, females lose ovum every month. And that's why you see differences in the ability to reproduce between males and females by age. Males tend to be able to still reproduce much later in life, whereas females have more difficulty because of the loss of eggs or ovum. Know the difference between monozygotic and dizygotic twins. So monozygotic, pretty simple, right? That you have one zygote that splits the same DNA. Dizygotic, different DNA. Two different egg cells are fertilized by two different sperm. That means you have two different unique combinations of human beings there. So mono, same. So same cell splits, identical twins. Dizygotic, divide, different, two different. Know these periods of development for sure. I will ask you this on the test. The germinal period, 2 weeks. 2 weeks, germinal period, 2 weeks after fertilization, the zygote starts to move down the uterus and begins to implant in the rich blood lining of the uterine wall of the mother. And when this happens, I'm not going to ask you this on a test, but the zygote now, when it burrows into the blood-rich lining of the uterine wall, is now called a blastocyst. And again, back to biology, maybe you guys remember in biology learning about gastrulation. Gastrulation, where cells start to form different layers, where some cells are destined to become blood and bones. Another layer of cells are destined to become your brain and spinal cord. Another layer of cells destined to become things like your skin, hair, things like this. This is why embryonic stem cell research is very different than, let's say, cord blood stem cell research. Because if you could capture the stem cells, those layers during gastrulation in the embryo and harvest them, thereby destroying the embryo, and that's the ethical consideration of this, you can grow organs. You can grow genetically appropriate organs for a particular person. When my last child was born in 2000, I gotta really remember, 2007, we had to make this decision about, do we want to bank the cord blood from my daughter? And the reasoning was, do we want to preserve the stem cells? Cord blood, she's already born. Gastrulation's already happened. Those stem cells have done their thing, but still we could harvest some stem cells from the cord blood. We decided not to, but the reasoning for that is because it had my DNA, had my wife's DNA, had my daughter's DNA, that we could potentially harvest some of those stem cells later in case one of the three of us became ill and there was genetic therapies that we could use there. So yeah, embryo is the name for the developing organism 2 weeks after, 2 weeks to 8 weeks after. So at about the 8th week, we now call it an embryo, and the embryo is going to grow, massively. It's going to start developing major organs. We're talking about the heart, liver, lungs. The brain is going to become really pronounced in this period. And what's really critical too in the embryonic period, from about 2 to 8 weeks, is that teratogens become a problem. Now, this word, teratogen, I'm going to throw it at you guys again. Teratogen, teratogen, teratogen. You're going to hear that word on the test. And here's a group of teratogens bouncing around, but take a look. Alcohol, nicotine, any psychoactive drug, anything you put in your body that can cause adverse effects to the prenatal development, we call a teratogen. I don't need you guys to memorize all these teratogens. I would just be aware of them and know that teratogens cause adverse effects on human development. So definitely be aware of those as you study. The ones that I think are most salient or important for you to probably take a look at is things that most people tend to abuse. Alcohol, nicotine, and specifically one that people don't think a lot about, caffeine. Caffeine is a stimulant. If you ingest too much of it during prenatal development, you will tend to see correlations with low birth weight babies. Not something you want to do. So embryonic period, 2 to 8 weeks. Conception, the first moment, right? Back up here. Conception, the moment. Germinal, after that moment to 2 weeks. Embryo, 2 to 8, and lastly, fetal, after 8 weeks to birth. And in the fetus, the fetal period, remarkable growth, hundreds of times of growth occurs. Fats being laid down in the brain during the myelination process. The babies beginning to hear for the first time, see for the first time during this period. So a remarkable change in growth and development during the fetal period. Know the major, I'm just kind of looking at your textbook, making sure. Know the major periods and their length of time. Know those key terms in terms of DNA, recessive traits, dominant traits. And that's about it from the first part of your chapter. A small percentage of your questions will come from that first part of the chapter. The next part, though, a large percentage of questions are going to come from, and that is starting on really page 322 in your book. We start talking about the actual development of the baby in terms of physical and cognitive development. Cognitive development, a lot of questions are going to come from this part of your chapter. And the name you have to remember. Let's go back to my Venn diagram for a second. So with DNA, we've been talking about this, right? Physical development for the most part. The next major domain we're about to talk about is cognitive. And the name I want you to remember here is Jean Piaget, French psychologist Piaget. Piaget developed this theory where he said children, based on their maturation, kind of grow and change throughout their life by age. So as from 0 to 2 years of age, they have certain cognitive abilities. From 2 to 7, they have other abilities. From 7 to 12, they have other abilities. And when they're above the age of 12, they have even more abilities. So his theory is all about this change based on maturation. And he said there are 4 stages. And what we need to do is break down those 4 stages. Before we get there, we need to think about something called schemas. Now, in the previous chapter, do you guys remember in the cognition chapter, we talked about concept formation, right? So let's I got to blank the screen for a second. So let's play a little game when it comes to concept formation. I'm going to blank the screen. And I'm going to show you something. I want you to tell me the first thing you think of whenever I bring the screen back up. One second. Pull up an image here. Just when you see the image, just tell me the first thing you think of. It'll be the image to the far right. And let me isolate it so you really can see it. Yeah. There we go. All right. Here we go. Here comes the image. Sorry, I had to change something to fool you guys. All right, taking this off. What is that? First thing that pops in your mind, what do you see? Type it in chat. I want to hear. What is that? Courtney says bird. Austin says bird. Salima, bird. Sydney, bird. Okay. Della, bird. No one said, Levi says bird. No one said to me in chat, yellow-tailed finch. Why? Why did you not say yellow-tailed finch to me? Are you bird experts? Schema is defined as mental concepts formed by children as they experience new situations or events. Right, Austin, you're not a bird expert. So let's think about all of your schemas for a second. I would say your schemas are adequately developed for that image I showed you. Because isn't it true that all of you could have answered animal? That was an animal, yes? You're not trying to flex your bird knowledge, Levi. I appreciate that, making the rest of us feel like we're not inferior to you. But if you think about it, all of you could have said animal, and that still would have been a correct response. It wouldn't have been as a developed schema, but throughout your life, you've experienced enough to know the difference between a mammal and a bird and a reptile. And so you have different schemas or concepts or categories for that, and you respond accordingly. But Apparently, none of us have experienced enough bird watching to know that that bird, the specific species, is a yellow-tailed finch. And so our schemas are not as quite developed, right? And Piaget said that's kind of the way it works. As 0 to 2, you first come in the world, trying to figure out really basic schemas like how to control your body. And then you move from that to learning basic concepts. And then you continue to have more and more robust schemas or concepts. Let's take a look at some of this development here. The first stage, the sensory motor stage, 0 to 2. What's happening here is all this. You ever watch a newborn baby? They do a lot of what I call breakdancing kind of movements. They lay in bed and they're just kind of all over the place. There's really no purpose to their movements. Even their ability to hold their head up is not there. But watch them over a period of months, and this kind of breakdancing weird action turns into meaningful grasping actions at a bottle or a mobile in a bed, and all of a sudden it becomes much less random, their motor movements, because their senses, their eyes and their taste buds and their hearing are now becoming coordinated with their motor actions so that they're able to accomplish tasks like holding a bottle for the first time, things like that. And they get better and better and better at it in that first year, up to the point where they can eventually walk upright by the end of their first 12 months of physical development. Another interesting thing happens, but more cognitively, around the period of about 9 months of age, a child begins to have object permanence. Now, this may seem trivial to you guys when you first hear it, but it's an amazing phenomenon. It's this idea that a child can think about an object without seeing it. I know you're probably thinking, that doesn't sound that big to me, Terry. It's amazing. Think about it. Without that ability to think about an object without it being in sight, how would we invent some of the most amazing things possible? How could scientists theorize quantum mechanics? How could chemists imagine molecules? You wouldn't be able to do any of those things without object permanence. And object permanence shows up early on at about 9 months of age. With my daughter, it was really funny. So like I was sitting on the couch, I watched TV, and she's like 7 months old, 6 months old. I'd be watching football and I'm clicking my controller and she won it. I grab it, hide it, she stopped crying. At about 10 months of age, she started crying for it. I grab it, hide it. She would continue crying because she knew it was there, even though she could not see it. Object permanence. It starts at about 9 months of age. Amazing. Also, symbolic thought starts. That's when children start to coo and babble, and they start to symbolize the world around them with language. That's what I mean by symbolic thought. We get to the age of 2. The shift from sensory motor, symbolic, object permanence turns to more advanced things. So about 2 to 7 years of age, what's happening here is preschool children, their language is exploding, right? They're learning more and more and more language, but they still fail at some really basic tasks. First of all, let's talk egocentrism. So a child that's like 4 thinks they're the best in the world at everything. You know, my son at 4 years old, I'm the fastest ever, Dad. I'm the fastest runner ever. Until, of course, he went to school and he was the second fastest in his class. That was a day of real disappointment. He was real upset. Egocentrism, just kind of egocentric thinking. I'm right. I'm the best. Centration, they tend to get fixated on task and they get fooled by things. You're about to see that. Conservation, they really don't understand volume very well. Not to calculate it. I'm not talking geometry or anything. I'm just saying they misunderstand basic conservation tasks. And they can't reverse things. So let's watch that. Let's watch some of this to really get a sense of it. This is the YouTube video that I linked here. Let's watch it together.
So I'm going to make 2 rows of quarters. Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or are they the same?
The same.
The same? Okay. this row have more quarters, or are they the same?
That one has more quarters.
That one has more quarters?
Yeah.
Why does that one have more quarters?
Because it's stretched out.
Because it's stretched out?
Yes.
Okay, so how many are in this row?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, how many are in this row?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So, are there more in this row, or are they the same?
The same.
So initially, right, he was demonstrating centration. He's so fixed on, hold on, they're the same width. Oh, she stretched them out. I'm still so fixated on that one's longer than the other. I can't logically work my way through this, that they're different. Does that make sense? So centration. A bit more.
The same?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have 2 sticks. Is this stick longer? Is this stick longer, or are they the same?
The same.
The same? What about now? Is this stick longer? Is this stick longer, or are they the same?
That stick is longer.
The stick is longer?
Yeah.
Can you tell me why?
Because you moved it over.
So now it's longer.
Yeah.
Reversibility. You can't understand, you reverse like their relation to one another, and now one's longer.
Okay, tell me. I'm going to pour blue water into each of these cups, and you're going to have to tell me when they have the same amount, okay? Okay, tell me when this one is the same.
The same.
The same? Those 2 are the same now?
Yeah.
Okay. They're the same? Good.
The way that's the same. Huh?
Good. Okay, now watch this. We're going to take the blue water from this glass. We're going to pour it into this glass. Now, does this glass have more water? Does this glass have more water, or are they the same?
Has more water.
This one has more water? Can you tell me why?
Because that one's higher than that one.
That one's higher than that one. Right?
So conservation,
Can you tell me?
right? It's that they can't quite understand that manipulating volume. You take that's kids, what, 3 or 4. You take an 8 to 10-year-old and do that with them, and they're not fooled at all. I mean, they can't calculate volume in geometry. They couldn't do that on paper, but they could look at it and just the simple logic of it and say, hold on, you just changed the glass. Like it's the same. So 2 to 7, they still make these kind of logical errors. By the time they're about 7 or 8, they move into concrete operations. And in concrete operations, they're no longer fixating, they're no longer centering on task, they no longer have problems with irreversibility, can't speak, or anything like that. But they still have problems with abstract thinking. So maybe you guys remember back to your math classes around 6th grade. Let's go back to 6th grade. Algebra. When you introduce variables, which are abstract unknown values, like with basic linear equations in 5th and 6th grade students, 11, 12-year-olds, they really struggle with those concepts a lot. They struggle with, you don't have to go there. Let's go back to 4th grade, where division is a big competency in mathematics that's assessed, right? I remember my oldest daughter struggled with division, and she'd bring home a worksheet of problems, and her first problem, let's say, is 20 divided by 5. And she's like, I can't do it, Dad, I can't do it. I'm like, yes, you can do it. No, I can't, I just can't, I can't do it. I went inside my bedroom, I got a jar of pennies, I poured a pile of pennies on the table. I said to her, count out 20 pennies. She counted them out, right? She put a pile of 20 pennies on the side. Concrete operations. Watch, guys. I said, it's fractions. Yeah, fractions are same thing, Del. Same thing. Like fractions are very abstract concepts. I say to her, do your math problem. She's like, I don't understand. What do you mean do the math problem? I said, what's your math problem? I said, read it out loud to me. She said, 20 divided by 5. I said, don't you have 20 pennies? She said, yeah. I said, divide it. She's how? I literally grabbed her hand. I put each one of her fingers on a penny, and I drug the group out. I said, there's one group. Drag the other groups. 1, 2, 3. It's 4. 20 divided by 5 is 4. That was easy. Yeah, it was easy because we made the problem concrete. And honestly, I would say to you guys, I know all of you guys are clearly out of this stage now. You're into adolescence where you're able to think abstractly. But being married to a mathematician, I can't leave this slide without saying this. Anytime you're struggling with abstract concepts, even when you get to the next stage, which is what he called formal operations, so about 13-ish years of age and above, PJ said that's when most of us, I want to emphasize that, most of us have the ability to think abstractly and hypothetically. Even when you get there and you're struggling in, let's say, with math problems, that's why using manipulatives or physical objects to try to understand math problems is still a very good way to understand. Even though you're out of that concrete stage, you're in the stage, it still augments your ability to understand abstract concepts. So try to use the manipulatives in mathematics whenever you're struggling with stuff like that. But formal operations, PJ would say, hey, your brain has matured to a point where it can think abstractly, hypothetically, you're good to go. Most people. Say that. All right. So Piaget wasn't the only person that argued cognitive theory. Another person that argued a cognitive theory was Vygotsky, and he was a Russian psychologist who said, no, Piaget's got it all wrong. See, Piaget said it's all about your biology and your maturation. 0 to 2, you mature a certain age, you do certain things. 3 to 8, do certain things. Vygotsky's like, nope, Piaget underemphasized other people. He underemphasized the social aspects of learning. What about teachers? What about tools around you, computers? Like right now, we are all of us in this chat. Those of you watching this video log later, we are actually proving Vygotsky's theory right now, because what we're doing is we're using tools, social cultural tools. We're using the internet. We're using laptops, phones. We're using YouTube, and we're connecting with each other right now. And by connecting with each other, we are learning by relying on others. You're not just sitting at home in your room, quarantined with your biology, learning psychology, right? But you are leaning on me, and you're leaning on the resources that I've given you. And I'm hopefully helping by doing these streams and reviews and things like that. Hopefully I'm scaffolding your learning. I'm kind of like, scaffolds, you see them on the side of buildings when buildings are being constructed. You kind of support a little bit at a time this building process of learning. Vygotsky argued that's what Piaget underemphasized. He said that we all reach what he called zones of proximal development. In math, I call them the humps. Like you're sitting in math class, you're working a quadratic equation, and your teacher's like, work this problem. And you're sitting there at your desk, and you see the quadratic, you're trying to work it out, and you're kind of stumped. You're like, man, I can't remember that algorithm of how to solve a quadratic. Maybe some of you could remember it and type it in chat. There's a acronym for how to solve quadratic equations. And it shows the sequence of what you do first, what you do next, what you do last. Hint, last. And so you're trying to remember that acronym. You're sitting there. You're staring at the problem. Your math teacher walks up. They do not give you the answer. They just whisper at you, hey, what's the FOIL method? And they walk away. And you're like, the FOIL method is first, inner, outer, last. And they scaffold you a little bit, right? You're kind of at that hump where you can't figure out the problem. They scaffold you a little bit in your cognitive development, enough for you to go, that's it, FOIL method, first, inner, outer, last. And you use the acronym and you solve the problem on your own. They don't give the answer. They just kind of scaffold you through that zone of proximal development. Again, it's just biology, but it's actually people, social cultural tools helping you develop. All right. So we go back to my Venn diagram where we all started from today. If I can find the right slide. There we go. Sorry, guys. I'll get there eventually. Venn diagram, right? So we first started talking about genetics, DNA, how we change dominant recessive traits, right? We talked about different stages of development. Then physical development. Then we come in here and we talked about Piaget and we talked about Vygotsky and cognitive development. Now we're shifting over to this domain, psychosocial development. Psychosocial development is about social and emotional regulation. And then one of the first things we have to talk about there is what you're born with when it comes to your psychosocial development. And that is your temperament. Temperament is hardwired, it's at birth, and it's got to do with your emotional regulation at birth. I wish you guys could meet, actually some of you have met my son, but I wish you could meet all three of my kids. I have an older daughter who's 23. I have a son who's 15. I have a daughter who's about to be 13. And at birth, they were three very different human beings. Their temperament, my first one was easy, adaptable. I had to wake her up to feed her. She would sleep through the night at birth. It was nuts. Even my pediatrician was like, Terry, you got to wake her up, set an alarm, do something, wake her up. She's too, you can't let her sleep through the night. My son came around, not so much. Very irregular, very irritable, non-adaptable. And you could even still see a little bit of that you can see a little bit of both of their personalities today, actually. And then my last was slow to warm up. And if you ever met her, she's kind of shy. Now, when you get to know her, she'll warm up to you, but she needs a bit of time to adjust to gradually change. So I had like one of each, my three kids. It was amazing as a psychologist to like watch them and still watch them as they grow up and see this temperament kind of play out. So temperament is like you're born with it. It's the initial part of your psychosocial development. But what about how temperament interacts with the way people, again, temperament biologically come what you're born with, and then how people interact with you. We used to think for a long time when it comes to infants, or humans really, not just infants, humans, that there are three basic needs: food, water, sex. You probably heard that before. Harry Harlow, and I'm going to show you this. It's really hard for me to watch this, and it'll probably be hard for you guys to watch this too. Harry Harlow had this hypothesis that, I wonder if there's another need besides food, water, sex. What about love? And, think about not all babies are born with the same temperament, and that means they're going to get different levels of care. Right? Think about that for a second. So take the very temperamental, irritable baby. Are they going to receive the same care as the really easy baby? So let's take a look at Harry Harlow's research question, which was, would there be differences in like what a baby's basic needs were? Here we go. If Terry could YouTube type. That was very dangerous what I just shared with you. Shouldn't have done that. All right. Come on. Should have preloaded this. Failing you guys. It's just sad to watch. Harlow's research was in the 40s and 50s, so this is going to be black and white, but that's why.
The search for new knowledge about our universe, our world, and ourselves. This monkey is an orphan, separated from his mother since the day of his birth. Literally, his life hangs by a thread, a soft cheesecloth pad that is his only companion, his only comfort. Once a day, the pad is removed for cleaning.
This is the laboratory of psychologist Harry Harlow.
Troubled, distressed, permanently deprived.
He is studying monkeys to better understand human relationships.
He may die for want of love.
Harlow believes he can use science to study love. With a series of pioneering experiments, he explores territory where few scientists have ventured.
Harlow said that there was such a thing as a science of love, for example, that love, the kind of intimacy that characterized relationships between mothers and infants, although in his case he studied monkeys, could be the object of science, that you literally could move love into a laboratory, put it under a microscope.
Harlow is studying love because he believes it makes an indelible impact on a young life. The relationship between a mother and her child, what Harlow calls our earliest social environment, could hold the key to explaining behavior throughout life. Harlow designs a set of ingenious experiments. He raises a baby monkey, allowing it to choose between two surrogate mothers, a wire mother that feeds it, and a cloth mother that doesn't. A cloth mother that Harlow thinks might provide something else: comfort and love.
So this is important. One of the big findings of Harlow's research is this need for contact comfort. You see the infant monkey is laying on this soft cheesecloth. It's receiving contact comfort. And that's going to be an important transition from temperament to what the next big psychosocial development milestone is: attachment. So what mediates a baby's temperament, whether they're easy, slow to warm up, or difficult, to being securely attached? It's contact comfort. Watch.
Here's baby 106, weaned on a wire mother. He's going to the wire mother.
But this infant quickly runs to the cloth mother, where he will stay for the next 18 hours cuddling. In Harlow's mind, choosing nurturing over sustenance. In another experiment, Harlow creates a fearful situation. Whom does the infant turn to now?
Let's find out what his reactions to his mother are when we frighten him. He's scared, all right. And he does what any child will do in a similar situation. He was running to his mother, to touch her, to drive away his fear.
To Harlow, there is something about the experience of comfort and love, even more than food, that seems crucial to all these monkeys. But what happens when the infant is raised alone, without any mother at all, wire or cloth? In this situation, the orphan monkey stays alone. He won't even go to the cloth mother when frightened, but retreats into his own world.
And this is maybe the saddest, outcome of this research that Harlow conducted, looking at psychosocial development and contact comfort. It's this idea that if a baby doesn't receive adequate contact comfort, it won't make a secure attachment. And we're going to talk about attachment more in a second, but if it doesn't have a secure attachment, we now have new disorders that we discovered. Like one is called a reactive attachment disorder, where we found in Russian orphanages where, you'd have like 21 babies, one nurse, and the nurse is rotating around. Goes to baby 1, changes the diaper, gives it a bottle. Baby 2, changes the diaper, gives it a bottle. Baby 3, so on and so forth. By the time it makes it back around, him or her make it back around to baby 1, what time is it to do again? Change the diaper and give a bottle. There's really no time for contact comfort. And, people started adopting these children from these orphanages. And we started seeing these very bizarre psychosocial behaviors from these children. They wouldn't want to get close to people. They would get angry if you tried to show them contact comfort at later ages. A lot of distancing, a lot of inability to understand spacing, like they would touch and get too close to people without if I get too close to you, you guys give me body language like back off, Terry. Like, I'm uncomfortable, and I can recognize that. But they had this inability to recognize that. And so Harlow's research showed us the importance of contact comfort. As horrible as it is to watch that research, it gave us amazing insight as psychologists as to the importance of contact comfort, which leads us to the next part of, and that is attachment. So temperament, contact comfort, attachment. This is a linear process, guys, we think about psychosocial development. Attachment is, as you look at a child that's a year old, let's say, a year and a half old, how do we categorize how attached they are to their primary caregiver? Are they securely attached? Are they avoidant, or are they ambivalent? And if you can't categorize them into any of those three, are they something, different? And to see that, I just want to show you a quick clip of a film as well. If we kind of move from monkeys to humans and we look at attachment, the way we test that is something called the stranger situation task. Let's do that here. Here's a good way to watch it. I'm going to speed this up.
Is to look for the type of balance that a child strikes between an attachment need and, on the other hand, to explore the play material.
Once Lisa has settled down to play, a stranger enters the room and sits in the chair reading a magazine.
Lisa, where's the bow? Where's the bow?
After a couple of minutes, the stranger attempts to interact with Lisa. Soon after,
and watch this moment right there, guys. See how the baby starts to go for the toy, but then thinks, the stranger's in here with me. Again, securely attached, because mom's like home base in this example. But watch what happens when mom leaves the room and the stranger tries to console the infant Lisa.
Lisbeth gets a cue to leave the room. The stranger tries to comfort Lisa, but in vain. Lisbeth comes back into the room, and the camera records how Lisa reacts.
The reunion is the most important part, because did you notice, like, she calmed down almost immediately, right, guys? That clearly shows a secure attachment. We'll let it play, and then we'll talk about the other types.
Now the first part of the procedure is over, and Lisbeth settles Lisa down again. The stranger leaves them alone together. And soon after, Lisbeth goes too. Lisa is on her own. Her distress is plain to see. Once again, the efforts of the stranger to console Lisa are to no avail. But Lisbeth manages to calm her almost at once, and shortly afterwards the observation ends. Lisa showed outward signs of what's called secure attachment.
So,
but can the essential elements of home life be
So, let's talk about what would have happened. Lisa clearly showed this attachment, right? Upset when the mom departs, but easily soothed when it returns. But what if when the mom came back in, or let's say before the mom left, Lisa really just explored, like when the toy rolled away, Lisa just kept going for the toy. Didn't really look back for mom for home base. That would be an avoidant attachment. Ambivalent is when the mother leaves and returns, the baby isn't consoled at all. The baby's still very angry at mom and continues to cry and yell, and that shows really more of an ambivalent, insecure attachment. And in terms of disorganized, it's kind of all over the place, right? The child feels fearful, dazed, depressed. You can't really categorize them in any of the three attachment types. All right, the last thing I really want to talk with you guys about this morning, we'll wrap up here, is Erik Erikson. Let's go back here to my diagram for a second, Venn diagram. We talked about physical development, DNA. Here we talked about Piaget, Vygotsky, cognitive development. So far here we talked about Harry Harlow. We talked about temperament, contact comfort, and we talked about attachment. But the last part of psychosocial development in that domain is important. The name to remember here is Erik Erikson. As I'm going to ask you as many questions on the exam about Piaget as I will about Erik Erikson. He's that important to psychosocial development. Erikson developed these stages that he believed were important to kind of slice the lifespan up into. Let's see if I have a. Let me do this. Sorry. Let me get an image of this. Erikson's stages image. I need to get a better image in the PowerPoint. Yeah, something like this. This would be a lot better. We're just going to tackle this image here. I'll copy and paste this in the PowerPoint, update it. Come on. There we go. So he sliced the lifespan up into these segments, right? Just like Piaget, but Piaget, remember, only went through about age 12 or 13. Not Erikson. Erikson says psychosocial development, the way we regulate emotions, build relationships, our self-esteem, our identity, all that, about human development really occurs throughout the lifespan. So he divided it up into infancy through about 18 months. 18 months to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 13. I want you guys to know all of these 8 stages. Okay? Trust versus mistrust. What's happening in trust versus mistrust? If you look in your textbook, there is, of course, how am I going to say this? Because you guys have an electronic version. On page 335 of the text. In your ebook, it's going to be towards the last section of chapter 8. There's this nice diagram or table that looks just like what we're looking at now, but with more detail. So from infancy to about a year-ish or 18 months of age, what's happening is babies are trying to figure out whether, if they trust mom. And this goes back to what we were just looking at with secure attachment and contact comfort. If a baby's given sufficient contact comfort, it's going to be securely attached and it's going to trust the mom. Mistrustful babies will be largely what you would see with insecure attachment. So it's like angel or devil on the shoulder, right, guys? A good versus bad outcome. By the time they reach about a year and a half, what you're looking to see is that they're autonomous, that they're doing things on their own. They'll develop a sense of independence versus being shameful or doubtful about their abilities. Real quick example, my oldest daughter, I remember she wanted to pour tea at dinner at 3. And my wife's like, no, she's going to break. We had a glass pitcher. She's like, she'll break the glass on the floor. We had ceramic tile. I said, well, why don't we do this? What if we gave her a plastic pitcher and we only filled it up like less than half? So it's really light. She's like, she'll probably still spill some of the tea in our food. And I'm like, the first time. So we'll eat some soggy food. The second or third time, she gets better at it. And what about, I don't want her walking away from the dinner table thinking she feels shameful for trying something new, independent on her own. So you really want to cultivate, that 18 months to 3 years of age, you want to cultivate an environment where children can be safe. That's why you put child locks and door locks, and you lock up, you put all your picture frames up off the ground. You want to create an environment where they can move around and try stuff without feeling like you're not going to yell no at them all the time. No. Because if you do that, you may develop some shame and doubt. Initiative versus guilt. About the time they reach 3 to 5 years of age, they're preschoolers, right? Preschoolers have more cognitive abilities, and they start putting things together more, and they want to initiate really new things with a sense of purpose. And if you are overly controlling there, they may feel guilty for even wanting to try new things. So you want to avoid that. From 5 to 13 years of age, the key goal is they want to be competent. Oh, you have to leave. Yeah, I'm almost finished, Levi. I'm wrapping up now. But have a good one. You want them to feel a sense of industry. And 5 to 13 years are great. Like if you guys are ever thinking about becoming a teacher, hint, hint, pro tip, this is the best. These are the best grades to teach. Kids just kind of work on their own. Like they're very industrious. They work pretty hard, unless, of course, you make them feel horrible by being overly critical of their competence. Then they feel inferior. 13 to 21, what you guys are in, you're trying to figure out your identity, who you are. And by the time you're into early adulthood, it's intimacy versus isolation. You're trying to find your soulmate, the person you love. If you don't resolve that task or crisis, you may feel isolated. 40 to 50, people like me, you want to be generative. In other words, you want to give back. I get up every morning and go to work, and I love it because I get to work with you, young people, and I feel like I'm giving back when I'm around you. I'll be honest. It's not just a paycheck. I'm not being stagnant. Like I'm staying up with you guys. Not completely, but I feel still connected to you. A lot of my colleagues struggle with this. They struggle with being generative. I wonder if some of them are struggling with that now because they're not using technology as much to reach out to you guys. Integrity versus despair, the last part of life, that is slowly but surely people are being robbed of all the things we've talked about so far: autonomy, initiative, industry. They're being put into nursing homes for their own safety. But when you do that, you kind of rob them of the psychosocial aspects, right? And that might lead to a despairing outcome. So no Erickson stages, and I want to wrap up with this one last slide, and then I'm done. No Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of death and dying. You experience death and dying, either someone close to you or you yourself are dying. First you deny it, then you usually get angry, then you start bargaining, typically with God, asking them to save you or them. Then whenever you get the answer you don't want, you often become very depressed. And at the end of it, you kind of reach some sense of acceptance. And I'm not saying you go through these stages like sequentially and it's over and done with. People bounce back and forth through them. But these are the stages that psychologists typically study at the end of life. All right, we got through it. I went a bit over, 15 minutes over. Sorry about that. I'll try to get better at it. But I hope you enjoyed this lecture. I hope this helped you understand Chapter 8, Lifespan Development, a bit better. There's one more section I didn't get a chance to talk about. I would lastly tell you to look at, and that's parenting styles. Know the difference between authoritative, authoritarian, and overly permissive parenting styles. But I'll leave it at that. So with that, I bid you guys farewell. I will be back on stream tomorrow, 11 a.m. to 12 tomorrow, doing office hours. If you got questions about your paper, tomorrow's the time to jump into the stream with me and ask me. It'll be free-flowing. I'll just be sitting here waiting for questions to pop up in chat. So I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks for coming. See you later. Have a good day. You bet, Slima. See you guys.